My son wanted to tear down my house to get to the treasure, $2 million in gold coins. But I knew there was something far more valuable hidden under this roof. I am 69 years old now, with hair that has turned as white as the cotton fields I used to run through as a girl, and hands lined like the maps I once studied as an archaeologist. My knees don't let me climb the way they once did, and my eyes blur at the edges when the evening light falls across the kitchen table. But my memory is sharp as a trowel against hard earth. It carries the weight of 1,000 stories, though one in particular keeps me company more than all the rest. The story of the map. It isn't just any map, you see. It's a hand-drawn piece of parchment, browned and delicate at the corners, with lines traced by my late husband's steady hand. Robert was his name, though most just called him Doc, on account of his tireless devotion to history. He wasn't a rich man nor a famous one, but he had a way of seeing the world that made it feel wide and full of secrets worth uncovering. And one of those secrets still lives folded in the bottom drawer of my old cedar chest. The map marks a spot, just one with a careful X pressed in faded red ink. It shows the grounds beneath our house, the very soil we've walked over for half a century. Buried there, Robert told me before he passed, rests a chest of gold coins worth near $2 million. But to me it is not the money that matters. Those coins, heavy and glittering as they might be, are nothing compared to what that map holds. The story of our life together. I can still picture the evening he showed it to me. The lamp on the bedside table burned low, and the air smelled of cedar wood and strong coffee. Robert's breath was shallow by then, illness having taken much from him, but his eyes were bright with mischief, the same as when I first met him on a dig site decades before. "Mary," he whispered, sliding the folded paper into my hand, "I've left you something, but don't think of it as wealth. Think of it as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" I asked, brushing his thinning hair back from his forehead. "Of us. Of what we built together. Of the life we dug out of nothing." When the sickness finally claimed him, the map was what I held to my chest at night. I could trace the lines with my fingertip and hear his voice again, see the twinkle in his eye, feel the warmth of his calloused hand over mine. To others it might look like a treasure hunt, but to me it was more like a love letter, a testament written not in ink alone, but in every memory we made in this house. I never dug it up. Oh, I thought about it plenty of times. On lonely afternoons when the wind rattled the shutters, or on sleepless nights when the rain poured down and the roof groaned. But I always stopped myself. You see, once the earth was turned and the chest brought up, the mystery would be gone. And what was left of Robert's final gift to me would be reduced to shiny metal, counted and locked away in some bank vault. No, I chose to let the map rest, to let the story breathe. It wasn't only sentiment. As an archaeologist, I learned that sometimes leaving things buried is as important as uncovering them. The ground beneath us holds not just riches but roots, fragments, memories of civilizations past. Digging too quickly can destroy more than it reveals. My house, built on old stone and weathered timber, seemed to guard its secret like a monument of its own. So I folded the map, pressed it back into the cedar chest, and carried on with my quiet life. My days are simple now. Tea in the mornings, a walk to the garden in the afternoons, letters to old colleagues who still send me news of their finds. Yet, in the quiet of evening, when the shadows stretch long across the parlor, I sometimes open that chest and run my fingers across the fragile paper. $2 million. That's what Robert said. To most it would be a fortune, enough to solve every worry. To me, it is the weight of his devotion, the proof that even in dying, he thought of leaving me not only comfort but wonder. I have guarded it all these years not because I need the gold but because I need the story. And maybe in the marrow of my bones, I knew one day the secret would not stay mine alone. Because secrets, like seeds, do not stay buried forever. A mother always knows when her child is troubled, though sometimes she wishes she didn't. My son David has carried worry in his shoulders since the day he turned 30, when ambition first outweighed patience. He wanted success quickly, the kind that shines in photographs and turns heads at family gatherings. I told him once, "Patience builds longer roads than pride, honey." He laughed, kissed my cheek and hurried off to another meeting. But now at 42, his pride has led him straight into a pit. I can see it in the lines around his mouth, in the way he avoids my eyes when he visits. He used to bound into the house like a boy, eager to sit at the kitchen table and devour a plate of biscuits. These days he hovers near the door, phone buzzing in his hand, voice clipped, mind already elsewhere. I knew something was wrong the morning he came by wearing that smile of his, the one that doesn't quite reach the eyes. He sat at the kitchen table, drumming his fingers, and asked me how I'd been keeping. Such polite questions, so rehearsed. He never asked about my health before unless he needed something. He stirred his coffee without tasting it, his hands restless. Then with an almost careless air he asked, "Mom, do you still have that old map Dad left you?" The words landed like stones in my chest. My heart seemed to stop beating for a moment, though my face stayed calm. I reached for the sugar bowl, poured a spoonful into my own cup and said lightly, "What would you want with an old scrap of paper like that?" "Oh, nothing," he said, waving his hand. "Just curious. You know how kids like to hear stories about treasure hunts and all that. Thought maybe I'd show it to the little ones someday." His voice was casual, but I caught the sharp flicker in his eyes. Not curiosity. Hunger. You see, my son is drowning. I've heard whispers from his old college friends. Read the nervous pauses in his wife's voice when she calls. His business, once full of promise, is bleeding money. Investments gone wrong. Deals too big for the ground he stood on. And debt like a shadow has wrapped itself around him. He hasn't said as much, but a mother doesn't need confession to see the truth. I remember how Robert and I started with nothing but a rented apartment, a beat-up car, and faith in each other. We built slowly, carefully, brick by brick. David grew up watching us, but he never had the patience for the long road. He always wanted shortcuts, always wanted the gold at the end without walking the miles in between. And now I fear he has remembered the map. That evening, as I sat alone in the parlor with Robert's photograph on the mantel, I whispered aloud, "What would you have me do, love?" His eyes, captured in that frame, twinkled as if he knew something I did not. The map had been meant for me, for us, and never for greed. But blood is blood, and how does a mother guard against her own child? I folded laundry the next morning, my mind still troubled, when I remembered the way David used to play as a boy. He'd dig holes in the yard, convinced he'd find pirate treasure. He'd run inside, face smeared with dirt, shouting, "Mom, come quick! I think I've found it." His imagination was endless, and I always played along, kneeling beside him to sift through earth for bottle caps and marbles. But this was no game. I heard from a neighbor later that week that David had been seen arguing outside the bank. His voice had carried across the sidewalk, sharp and desperate. I didn't ask him about it. If he wanted to keep me in the dark, I'd let him. But in my heart, I began to piece it together. My son had debts he could not pay, and he believed the gold was his salvation. What he does not understand is that the map isn't only about coins. It's about history, love, memory. If he tries to take it, he won't just be stealing from me. He'll be trampling over his father's legacy, our life's work, and the sacredness of this house. I lay awake that night listening to the creaks of the old beams above me, the house settling in its sleep. I thought about Robert's whisper. Think of it as a reminder of us. And I realized something cold. My own son didn't see a reminder of love, he saw a payday. I cannot tell him I know. Not yet. A mother must be careful when the child she raised becomes a stranger at her door. But I feel it in my bones. David is plotting. He will not ask again for the map. He will take what he wants in silence with deceit. And I, in turn, must be ready. Because even a mother's love has its limits when it comes to betrayal. It began with papers. That's how these things always start. Not with shouting or storms, but with quiet pages slid across a table. My son arrived one morning with a folder tucked under his arm. The kind of stiff, official-looking thing you'd expect from a bank or a lawyer. He kissed my cheek, too quickly, as though affection could disguise the sharp smell of nerves clinging to him. "Mom," he said, his tone careful, "I had some folks come by. They inspected the house. Turns out it's in dangerous condition." I blinked at him from across the kitchen table. Dangerous? This house? I ran my hand along the scarred wood of the table where his tiny fingers once learned to trace letters. Dangerous was the last word I'd ever use for these walls. They had stood longer than his lifetime. Dangerous how? I asked. He cleared his throat, shuffled the papers and pushed them toward me. Foundations unstable. Basement shifting. If we don't act, you could be hurt. We'll need to do a reconstruction. I've already arranged for a company to handle it. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I reached for my teacup, lifted it slow and sipped. It was chamomile, calming, steady, but my heart beat fast under my ribs. He wasn't just lying, he was lying badly. His eyes darted, his words rehearsed. I pretended to read the top page, though the words blurred. "And this company, you trust them?" "Of course," he said quickly. Too quickly. "They're professionals. They'll take care of everything. You'll hardly need to lift a finger." I folded the page back into the folder and slid it across the table toward him. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 3 days later they came. Big machines rattled down the narrow road, engines coughing dust into the air. Men in hard hats stomped up my porch steps, boots heavy as judgment. Their trucks had no names painted on the sides, just dull gray metal with mud splashed up the fenders. One of them, broad-shouldered with a cigarette dangling from his lips, tipped his helmet at me and said, "We'll be starting in the basement, ma'am." The basement? Of course. I stood on the porch, arms crossed over my cardigan, and watched as they unrolled their cables and carried tools through the front door. Their laughter was too coarse, too careless. These were not men who fixed houses. These were diggers. The neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers fluttering through the street. To them, it must have looked like my son was taking care of his aging mother, making sure her old house was safe. That's what he wanted them to believe. But I, who had dug trenches under the desert sun, who had brushed soil from pottery thousands of years old, knew exactly what those men were after. Not safety, not reconstruction, treasure. I walked slowly down the steps, cane tapping against the stone, and circled the trucks. No licenses displayed, no company name, no phone numbers painted on doors. Just blank steel and dented bumpers. I felt Robert's map like a weight in my pocket, though I hadn't brought it out. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were chasing. David hovered near the doorway, pretending to supervise. His shirt was neatly pressed, his voice louder than usual as he called instructions, trying to sound like a man in control. But when his eyes flicked to me just for a second, I saw something else: desperation. "Mom, don't worry," he said, forcing cheer into his tone. "This is for your own good. Once they're done, the house will be better than ever." I smiled at him, that practiced grandmother's smile, soft and harmless. "Of course, dear," I said. "I trust you know best." But inside, my thoughts sharpened like a trowel against stone. I made tea for the workers that afternoon, carrying the tray out with trembling hands. They grinned at each other, as if they had already won. But I caught them whispering when they thought I wasn't listening. Phrases like "under the floorboards" and "get it out before dark." They weren't even trying to sound professional. When the sun dipped low and the machines roared louder, I slipped away to my study. The cedar chest creaked as I opened it, my fingers brushing the folded map. Robert's careful lines seemed to glow in the lamplight. I pressed my hand over it, whispering, "Not yet, love. Not for them." I knew then what I had to do. My son thought he was clever, hiding his scheme behind paperwork and machines. But I had spent my life reading ruins, uncovering lies buried deep in the ground. And if he wanted to play this game, I would let him dig his own hole. Because sometimes, to protect what matters most, you don't fight head-on. You smile, you nod, and you wait. And oh, was I ready to wait. I've always believed that when something feels wrong in your bones, it usually is. And the moment those men set their boots on my basement steps, my bones ached. I pretended, of course. That's a talent you develop as you age. Pretending not to notice when someone thinks they're fooling you. I smiled, served tea, even offered them slices of pound cake I'd baked the day before. A harmless old woman, that's what they saw. Let them keep seeing it. But once they were gone for the evening, engines rumbling down the lane, I pulled my cardigan tighter around me and sat by the window, watching the moonlight slide across the lawn. That's when I decided I wouldn't be fooled, not by my own flesh and blood, and certainly not by his hired diggers. The next morning I called an old colleague, Dr. Harris from the university. He's older than me, slower now, but sharp as ever when it comes to history. "Harris," I said, lowering my voice though the house was empty, "I need you to bring a few friends." Quietly. "There's something under this house, and I don't mean treasure." He chuckled, thinking I was joking, but when I told him about the men, his tone shifted. "Artifacts? Possible settlement remains?" "Exactly," I whispered. "Robert always suspected it. That's why he marked the ground the way he did. Coins, yes, but maybe more. Maybe history itself." We arranged for him to come by on Saturday with 2 graduate students, all under the guise of a friendly visit. That gave me 3 days to keep the so-called construction company at bay. David dropped by on Thursday with that same tight smile. "Mom, how are the men treating you? Not too much noise, I hope." "Oh no," I said sweetly. "They're very kind. One of them even carried my groceries inside for me. I can't complain." He beamed, proud of his little charade. What he didn't see was that I had slipped into the basement after they'd left, running my hands along the soil where they'd begun to pry. In the dim light, I noticed something they hadn't. A fragment of pottery sticking out of the dirt, edges painted with the faintest line of ochre. Not coins. Not gold. Something far older. I brushed the soil back gently with my fingers, the way I had done 1,000 times before in the field. My breath caught in my throat. If this was what I thought it was, the story beneath my home was bigger than Robert's treasure. This was history that belonged not just to me but to the nation. That night I sat at my desk and opened my journal. My handwriting trembled, but my resolve did not. "If David thinks he will strip this house bare," I wrote, "he underestimates me. He forgets his mother was not just a housewife but an archaeologist who learned to read the earth like scripture. He forgets I have allies who respect truth more than money." On Friday, I baked another cake and sent a slice with the workers as they packed up for the weekend. They laughed, smacking their lips, no idea that I had already laid my trap. "See you Monday, ma'am," one called out. "Yes," I whispered as the truck pulled away. "We'll see." Saturday morning dawned crisp and bright. Dr. Harris arrived in his old Buick, the graduate students tumbling out with notepads and cameras. They carried backpacks that looked ordinary enough, but inside I knew were brushes, small trowels, and measuring tapes. Tools of truth. We gathered in the basement, sunlight slanting through the narrow windows. I showed them the pottery shard, and Harris's eyes widened behind his spectacles. "My word," he breathed. "This could date back centuries. Do you know what you're sitting on, Mary?" "Yes," I said softly. "I've always known." For hours we worked quietly, uncovering small fragments here and there. careful not to disturb too much. Every piece was documented, photographed, wrapped. By the time they left, my heart was pounding, not from fear but from certainty. I had proof. Proof that this house wasn't just timber and stone. It was heritage. That evening David called. "Mom, everything all right? You sound tired." "Oh, just a bit of spring cleaning," I said lightly. "You know how it is, dust never quits." He laughed, reassured, but I could almost hear the clock ticking in his head. He wanted the gold and he wanted it soon. I hung up the phone and pressed my hand against the cool wall of the basement. Robert's map still rested safely upstairs, folded in its cedar chest. For years I'd guarded it as a love token. Now it had become a weapon, a shield against greed, even against my own son. The suspicion that had gnawed at me all week hardened into resolve. My son thought he was clever, but he had underestimated the strength of an old woman who had spent her life unearthing the past. And now I would unearth it again on my terms, not his. The basement of my house had always been a place of simple things. Jars of preserves, stacks of old newspapers, Robert's boxes of tools. But now, under the dust and shadows, it had become something else entirely. A site, an excavation, a battlefield too, though no one but me seemed to realize it. When Dr. Harris and his students came back the following week, they worked with quiet excitement. Their voices echoed softly against the stone walls as they knelt with brushes and trowels, uncovering the ground inch by careful inch. I sat on the steps with a notebook in my lap, my heart steady for the first time in weeks. I was watching history reveal itself under my own roof. The students found more fragments of pottery, thick, hand-shaped, the kind that spoke of meals cooked long before any modern stove. Then came a shard of glass, pale green and curved, as if from a vessel once used to hold oil or wine. Harris's face flushed with color as he examined it. "Mary," he whispered, "this isn't just chance. This is evidence of settlement. Possibly pre-colonial." My breath caught. Robert had always said the land we built on held secrets, that this region had once been a crossroads. He had half-joked about living on top of a buried story. Now his whispers were proving true. The students laid each artifact out on a cloth, their hands reverent. I leaned forward, tracing the outlines with my eyes, and felt something stir in me. These were not coins meant to be hidden in a chest. These were voices from the past, rising through the soil. That evening, after the others had left, I remained in the basement alone. I pressed my palm against the cool dirt wall and whispered, "Robert, do you see? Do you see what you've left me with?" The silence answered, but I swear I felt him there, as if the earth itself was nodding. By the next morning my resolve was firm. I would not allow David and his men to destroy this. The coins, yes, they might be real, but what lay here was worth more than gold. It was proof that this house, this very ground, belonged not only to me but to the memory of countless lives before mine. I began to collect evidence carefully, the way I had done in my younger days on digs. Photographs with clear dates. Notes in my old field journal, written in the crisp, measured style that had once earned me respect among colleagues. Every shard, every scrape of color in the soil was recorded. On Tuesday, the construction company returned. Their machines roared in the driveway again, but this time I met them at the door. "Not today," I said firmly, blocking the entrance with my body. "There's been a change of plans." The foreman frowned, his cigarette dangling from his lips. "Your son said." I said. I interrupted, my voice steady as stone, "that no one touches this house until further notice." They muttered among themselves, but I stood firm. At last they retreated, engines grumbling as they pulled away. I knew it was only a delay. David would be furious. But I needed time, and now I had it. That evening Harris called with news. He had shown the photographs to a colleague at the State Historical Society. "Mary," he said, You may have something that qualifies as a heritage site. If so, the house cannot be touched without government approval. Heritage site. The words rang like bells in my ears. I closed my eyes, tears pricking. This wasn't just about saving a house anymore. It was about preserving history. My home was no longer only mine. It had become a monument. I thought of David then, his hungry eyes fixed on the promise of gold. He would never understand that what we had found was richer. To him, clay and glass were worthless. But to the world, they were priceless proof of lives lived long before us. I went to bed that night with the map tucked beneath my pillow. For years it had been a love letter, a secret between Robert and me. Now it was also my shield. The gold might never be touched, but the map would help me guard what truly mattered, the story written in the ground. The next day when David arrived, his voice already sharp with impatience, I met him at the door with calmness that seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. "Mom, what's going on? The men said you sent them away." I smiled faintly, leaning on my cane. "Yes, because I've discovered something in this house that makes it untouchable. Something older, stronger, more valuable than you can imagine." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You mean that old map? You've gone soft in the head." But I only shook mine. "No, David. I mean history. And you will not take that from me." For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. I turned away, heart pounding. The battle had begun in earnest. When my son realized I would not hand him the house, the ground seemed to shift between us like a fault line. He stopped pretending, stopped smiling that false smile of his. The mask fell away, and beneath it was the face of a desperate man. It began with papers again, only this time they did not arrive in his hands. They came in a thick envelope delivered by a courier, the kind you have to sign for. Inside was the cold weight of a lawsuit. My son, my only boy, accusing me, his own mother, of fabricating stories to block necessary demolition. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before me, the light from the window falling across the bold letters of his accusations. Fraud, obstruction, willful endangerment. To see my name tied to such words made my hands shake. I placed my palm over them, willing my heart to slow. Robert's photograph watched from the mantel. "You always said archaeology was politics in disguise," I whispered to him. "Seems you were right." David wasted no time. Within the week, he appeared with experts of his own. They marched into my living room in their polished shoes, carrying clipboards, wearing expressions of smug certainty. They glanced at the pottery fragments Harris had carefully wrapped and catalogued, and with a wave of a hand dismissed them as common refuse. "This map," one said, holding up Robert's drawing like it was nothing but a child's scribble, "has no historical value. It's a curiosity at best. Certainly not grounds to block construction." I sat straight in my chair, cane resting across my lap, and watched them with calm eyes. Let them speak their lies. I had learned long ago that truth has a patience lies cannot match. Still, when the judge's letter arrived, my stomach twisted. We had been given a deadline. 3 weeks to prove the historical significance of the site. 3 weeks to show that this house was more than timber and stone. Otherwise, demolition would proceed. That night I walked the room slowly, my hand trailing along the walls. Every corner carried memory. Robert's laughter, David's first steps, the echoes of dinners and Christmas mornings. And now, all of it threatened to be erased under the blade of a machine. But it was not just sentiment I held on to. It was evidence. The pottery, the glass, the soil itself, these were pieces of a story far older than us. I gathered them carefully, labeling each one in neat script. I wrote late into the night, crafting reports the way I once had for conferences, precise and clear. I was not only a mother in that moment. I was an archaeologist again, standing in defense of the past. David's visits grew colder. He no longer tried to soften his words. "Mom," he said one afternoon, standing stiff in the doorway, "you're making a fool of yourself. The court won't take you seriously. You're wasting everyone's time." I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I saw the boy who once held my hand on his first day of school. But then I blinked and he was gone. In his place stood a man who had chosen greed over family. "You're wrong, David," I said quietly, "and you'll see that soon enough." He scoffed and turned away, muttering about how stubborn I was. But his steps sounded uneasy on the porch, as though even he knew the ground beneath him was not as solid as he pretended. Harris and his students came nearly every day, working with urgency but also with care. More fragments appeared, each one another thread in the tapestry of proof we were weaving. They spoke of patterns in the soil, of settlement layers, of historical significance. Words that would matter in court. Still, I knew the danger. My son was clever when cornered, and desperation makes cleverness dangerous. He brought more so-called experts, each one willing to declare that the artifacts meant nothing. He waved their reports before the judge, demanding that my objections be dismissed. The judge, a weary man with kind eyes, leaned forward at the last hearing. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you have 3 weeks. Bring me evidence. Solid evidence. Otherwise, I have no choice but to allow the demolition." 3 weeks. That was all. When I returned home that evening, the sky was deep with twilight. I stood on the porch and breathed in the cool air, letting it steady me. I was not afraid. Not truly. I had lived long enough to know that truth, like roots, runs deep. Inside, I placed the map back in its cedar chest, smoothing the folds. "Robert," I whispered, "this is bigger than us now. They will not erase what you left behind. I won't let them." The house creaked around me, old but strong. And I knew then that the fight had only just begun. I have always believed that betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from the hands of someone you trusted. An enemy's strike you can brace for. But a friend's treachery is like a knife slipped between your ribs while you're looking the other way. For weeks, my house had become a gathering place for historians, archaeologists, and students. They came with their notebooks and cameras, their brushes and little shovels, eager to uncover fragments from the past. My living room was crowded with boxes and labeled bags, every one a piece of proof that my home stood on sacred ground. I served coffee, baked bread, kept them fed, just as I had done for Robert and his colleagues all those years ago. Among them was Dr. Andrew Collins, a younger archaeologist I had met at a conference long ago. Bright, charming, with a smile that could win over anyone in the room. Robert always said Andrew had too much ambition for his own good, but I had defended him. "He's just eager," I'd said back then. "Give him time." Now, years later, Andrew was back in my home, lending his expertise, assuring me he wanted nothing but the truth preserved. He crouched in the basement beside Harris and the students, brushing soil with careful strokes, making notes in his neat handwriting. To me, he seemed like an ally, a gift even. But then the whispers began. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Harris pulled me aside, his face grim. "Mary," he said, "I don't like to bring bad news, but I overheard something this morning. Andrew was on the phone in the yard. He mentioned your son's name." My stomach tightened. "David?" "Yes. Said something about making sure the findings weren't exaggerated. Promised he could smooth things over with his report." Harris lowered his voice. "Mary, I think he's working with your son." For a moment, I could only grip the edge of the table. Betrayal is a slow-burning thing. It first shocks you, then leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. I thought of all the meals I had served Andrew, all the trust one had placed in him, and my heart ached. That evening, when the others had gone, I waited. I brewed a pot of tea and sat in the kitchen, the map folded on the table before me. When Andrew came upstairs, brushing dust from his jacket, I gestured for him to sit. Andrew, I said softly, you've been very helpful here. But I need to ask you something plain. Are you working with my son? His eyes flickered just for a second before he composed himself. Mary, of course not. Why would you think that? Because I know the sound of a lie, I answered, my voice steady. I've spent a lifetime brushing dust from things buried. The truth always shows itself in the end. He looked away, his jaw tightening. That was all the answer I needed. 2 days later, the betrayal was no longer whispered. It was written in ink. Andrew filed a report that reached the judge's desk, claiming our discoveries were inconclusive, that the fragments could easily be explained as common household refuse from the 19th century. His words cut the knees out from under our case. The scandal was swift. Journalists caught wind of the conflicting reports. Some questioned whether I was fabricating stories to stall demolition. Others hinted at a family feud over imagined treasure. For a few days, my name was dragged through whispers and doubt. But I refused to bow. At the next meeting with the Historical Society, I stood before them, cane in one hand, Robert's map in the other. My voice trembled at first but grew stronger as I spoke. Gentlemen, ladies, when I was 24 years old, I crouched in the burning sun of the desert, brushing away soil until my hands bled. And I learned then that truth cannot be silenced by ambition. This house sits on ground older than any of us in this room. I have seen the shards, the layers, the evidence with my own eyes. And if one of our number chooses to falsify his findings, then let it be known. His betrayal is not of me, but of history itself. The room fell silent. Andrew shifted in his seat, his face pale. He did not look at me. By the end of that week, word spread of his duplicity. Other historians distanced themselves from him. His name was stained, though the damage to my case still lingered. I knew David had thought himself clever, buying loyalty in secret. But in truth, he had only weakened his own cause. For once a liar is exposed, every word he speaks afterward tastes of ash. That night, I sat in the parlor with Robert's photo on the mantel and whispered, "They think they can outwit me, love. But they don't know the patience of old women. They don't know the strength of the past." The betrayal had shaken me, yes, but it had also lit a fire in me. I would not be silenced, not by my son, not by false friends, not even by the weight of scandal. If anything, Andrew's treachery had given me more resolve. For truth, like buried gold, shines brighter once it is unearthed. I have always believed that silence can be a shield. But sometimes, when lies grow too loud, you have to let the truth speak. After Andrew's betrayal, I realized the battle would not be won in quiet basements or whispered reports. My son had money enough to buy experts and spin stories. I had something far stronger: memory, history, and the courage to stand unashamed in the light. So I called the press. It was not an easy decision. At my age, privacy feels like the last treasure you can guard. But I also knew the danger of secrecy. Secrecy is what David counted on. Doing his digging quietly, papers filed quietly, my name ruined quietly. If the world wasn't watching, the house would be torn down before I could prove its worth. I started with an old contact, a young journalist named Clara, whom I had once guided through a university dig years ago. She had been barely 20 then, knees dusty, hair tied back, eyes full of questions. Now she was a woman with a voice in the local paper. When I called, she recognized my voice at once. "Mrs. Miller," she said, surprise softening into warmth. "I haven't heard from you in years." "I need your help, Clara," I told her, my voice steady though my heart beat fast. "There's a story here, one that must be told before it's buried under rubble. Will you come?" She came the very next morning, camera slung across her shoulder, notebook in hand. And she wasn't alone. Word travels quickly in her profession, and within hours my lawn was dotted with reporters, microphones glinting in the sun, cameras rolling. I stood on the porch in my best cardigan, cane in one hand, Robert's map in the other. The reporters murmured, shifting, waiting. For a moment I closed my eyes and felt the weight of Robert's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Then I spoke. "This house," I said, my voice carrying across the yard, "is more than timber and plaster. It is built on history. My husband, before he died, left me this map. Not of riches only, though coins may be buried here, but of our life together. And in recent weeks, fragments uncovered in the basement have proved what we long suspected, that this ground holds the remnants of lives lived centuries before us. Pottery, glass, settlement layers. This is not merely my home. It is a monument of national importance." The cameras clicked, the microphones leaned closer. I lifted the map, the fragile paper trembling in my hand. "This is the legacy my husband entrusted to me. My own son would see it destroyed for profit. But I will not let that happen. The truth is here, and I will not be silenced." Clara snapped photographs as I laid out the pottery fragments on a small table, each one carefully wrapped and labeled. The journalist leaned in, capturing every detail. The students who had worked alongside Harris stood by me, nodding, their voices adding weight to mine. One of the reporters asked, "Mrs. Miller, do you have proof that your son is behind this demolition?" I met the man's eyes, my own unflinching. "The proof is in his actions. The company he hired has no name, no record. The papers he brought me were forged. I am not only fighting for my house, I am fighting for the truth." By evening, the story was everywhere. Photographs of me holding the map appeared on television, my words quoted in headlines. "Grandmother defends House of History against demolition." Letters poured in from strangers, some doubting, some cheering. The neighborhood buzzed with talk, and for the first time, David's plan could no longer unfold in secret. He came to me the next day, face red, jaw tight. "Mom, what have you done?" "I told the truth," I said simply. "You've made me look like a criminal." I looked at him, the boy I once rocked to sleep, now a man undone by greed. "You did that yourself, David. I just shone a light." He left in anger, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But I only sat back down at the kitchen table, hands folded over the map, heart calmer than it had been in weeks. The battle was no longer mine alone. The press had seen. The world was watching. And once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. That night, as I prepared for bed, I pressed the map flat on the quilt Robert and I had shared for so many years. "We've done it, love," I whispered. "They can't bury the truth now." The house creaked softly, as though in agreement. "The thing about lies, my dear, is that they don't age well. They wrinkle, they crack, and under the smallest bit of pressure they fall apart." For weeks, my son had hidden behind paperwork, loud words, and his so-called construction company. But once the press had their eyes on him, the cracks began to show. It started with Clara's article. She didn't just publish my story. She dug deeper, the way a true journalist does. Within days, she discovered that the company David hired had no license on record. No office, no phone number, no website. Nothing but a name typed on forged documents. And when she pressed the county office for details, they confirmed what I had already suspected. The papers David brought me were counterfeit. I sat at my kitchen table when she called, her voice bright with triumph. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "your son's company doesn't exist. It's a shell. The documents are fake." I closed my eyes, the relief mixing with sorrow. "Thank you, Clara," I whispered. I knew it, but it's different hearing it out loud. The next morning, the headline blazed across the local paper. "Fake construction company at center of historic house dispute." My phone rang all day. Neighbors called with words of support. Colleagues from the university sent letters. Even strangers wrote to say they stood with me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. But David, oh David. He came storming up my porch steps that evening, his face pale with fury. "Mom!" he snapped, slamming the newspaper onto the table. "Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined me." I looked at the headline, then back at him, my voice calm. "No, David. You ruined yourself. You forged papers. You tried to steal. The truth did nothing but catch up with you." He clenched his fists, pacing like a caged animal. For a moment I almost reached for him, almost wanted to remind him of the boy who used to sit at this same table with peanut butter on his cheeks. But then he spat. "You care more about dirt and broken pots than your own son." That cut deeper than I expected. My chest ached with it. I steadied myself on my cane. "I care about truth, David. And I care about the memory of your father. He left that map as a reminder of who we were. You've turned it into a prize to be stolen. That's not what family is." For the first time I saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger but fear. He knew the law was closing in. Sure enough, within the week, officials launched an investigation. Fraud, they called it. Attempted theft. Misuse of public documents. The sheriff himself came to my door one morning, tipping his hat politely. "Ma'am, your son will be questioned. We've got enough to open a case." I thanked him, though my heart felt heavy. What mother dreams of hearing her son might face charges? Yet I also felt a strange peace. For too long David had walked in shadows. Now the light was on him. Meanwhile, the historian's findings grew stronger. Harris and the students presented a formal report to the State Historical Society, detailing every artifact, every layer of soil. The words "of significant historical importance" were stamped across the top. The judge at last had what he needed. The next court session was unlike any other. The room was packed, reporters, neighbors, curious faces. I sat in the front row, the map folded neatly in my lap. David sat across the aisle, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. When the judge spoke, the room fell silent. He read aloud the findings. Forged documents, fake company, undeniable archaeological evidence. He looked at David with eyes that held no pity. "You attempted to defraud not only your mother, but this state. You endangered heritage for personal gain." David shifted, his face ashen. I watched him, my heart torn in two directions. He was my son, my flesh and blood. But he was also the man who had tried to strip me of my home and his father's legacy. When the gavel struck, declaring the investigation against him formal, a murmur swept through the room. Some gasped, others shook their heads. I sat still, hands folded, breathing deep. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Clara approached me. "Mrs. Miller," she said softly, "you've won." I shook my head. "No, dear. Not yet. Winning would mean my son had never walked this path. Winning would mean his hands were clean. All I've done is protect the truth." She touched my arm gently. "Sometimes that's all anyone can do." That night, I walked through the house in the quiet. I touched the walls, the photographs, the cedar chest. I thought of Robert, of the life we built, of the boy we raised. My heart ached, but it also swelled with something else, resolve. The truth had come out. The company was exposed. The fraud was undeniable. David would face the law. And as for me, I would face whatever came next, with my head high and my home still standing. When the decision finally came, I sat at the same kitchen table where this whole storm had begun. The letter trembled in my hands, not from weakness, but from the weight of it all. The state had declared my house a national landmark. The artifacts would be preserved. The coins, too, sealed beneath protection, not for private profit but as part of history. And me? I was granted the right to live here until my last breath. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I thought of Robert, of his steady hand drawing that map. He hadn't left me riches to spend. He had left me a legacy to guard. And I had kept it safe. David was not so fortunate. The investigation pressed on. His lies laid bare for all to see. He lost his business, his standing, and the trust of many. A mother's heart still aches for her child, but I knew this. He had chosen his path and I had chosen mine. The reporters called me a symbol. Neighbors spoke of courage. But I am no hero. I am simply an old woman who refused to let greed bury memory. Some evenings I walk the room slowly, cane tapping against the worn floors, and I feel the house breathe with me. In the quiet I hear Robert's voice. Think of it as a reminder of us. I smile then, resting my hand on the cedar chest. The world may see treasure in gold coins and pottery shards. But to me the true treasure is this. Love remembered, truth defended, and the knowledge that even in age I could stand firm and win. This house is not just mine. It belongs to history, and it always will. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.